Hey YouTubers, welcome to the revised version of the Planted Tank series. In this 4-part series, we're going to be touching base on all the aspects of setting up and maintaining a planted aquarium. There are 4 parts to this series. The first part, this part, will be concerning the actual aquarium or tank and the filtration system. In the second part, we'll be going over the substrate and fertilization. In the third part, we'll be completely dedicated to the lighting of the tank. And in part 4, we will be going over and discussing the different aspects of plants, hard to grow, easy to grow, which ones need to be out in the light and which ones need to be tucked away with a little bit of shading. This series is going to be dedicated to those who have been thinking about, pondering, setting up a planted tank and thought maybe, hey, can I do this? There's a lot of videos out there on YouTube right now that go over some of the aspects of setting up a planted tank. But with this series, I felt like I have an opportunity to go a little more in depth with what all is involved. So here we go. We're going to start off with first thing you got to consider if you want to do a planted tank. And that would be, what kind of tank are you going to do? And when I say what kind of tank, in other words, what size aquarium are you going to buy or do you have that you plan on using for this planted tank? For those of you who already have a tank, you'll glean some information out of this. For those of you who have not yet purchased a tank, this is going to be a little more in depth on choosing the tank. Now, first off, when choosing a tank for a planted tank, this is going to depend a lot on the type of plants and the type of lighting you're going to be using. Let me expand on that a little bit. If you choose a short, wide, and deep tank, which would translate to short top to bottom, wide side to side, and deep front to back,
you will not require as intensive lighting, being that you don't have as much of a water column to have to put the light through to get to the substrate. If you choose or already have, which is pretty much standard in the industry with the larger tanks, a tall, narrow, and short tank, which is high in the height of the tank.
In other words, top to bottom.
Like your standard 55, which is usually around 22 inches high. Narrow, as in front to back. It's only 1 foot deep. And, the shortness can be
referring to the width across the front of the tank.
The width isn't so important, except as into your layouts and what you're wanting to achieve as an aquascape. That is kind of to your own taste. But the height is very important, and the depth is relatively important also. So, if you want to go with what a lot of the people say as a low-tech tank, and when I refer to low-tech, which is really not the appropriate term, it's more of a low-maintenance, low-lighting, low-cost tank, where you don't have a big budget and you're going to be buying your plants piecemeal from your local pet store or from other aquarius, and you don't have a big budget to go with, and you can't go out and buy the latest greatest LED lighting system. So you're going to be running just basic fluorescent tubes over the top, and you're on a budget. I would recommend
A short, wide, and deep tank.
um, some to mention would be a 20 long or a 20 breeder, as they're also called, a 40 long or 40 breeder, which they're also called. These are tanks that have a short distance from substrate to top of the tank. They're not that tall, which means that you can use lower lighting and still get a lot of light down to the substrate. You don't have to go out and spend a lot of money on very sophisticated lighting. If you have more of a budget and or you already have a tank that is tall and narrow, you are going to have to either double up on your lighting or get some of the more sophisticated lensed type LED lighting, which will penetrate to the depths of the tank. Use metal halides, which is really kind of old school and expensive to run, and the bulbs are very expensive. So I really wouldn't recommend that. But if you happen to have them around and that's what you're starting with, they'll work. They will work well, as a matter of fact. Glass versus acrylic. Should you get a glass tank or an acrylic tank? The thoughts there are glass tanks are probably the most prominent. They're the easiest to get. You're going to spend less on a glass tank as opposed to an acrylic tank, unless you can find a good used one on sale. But generally, glass tanks are cheaper. For all intents and purposes, when starting out, I would recommend a glass tank to start with. Now, if you've been in the hobby for a long time and say you've kept fish and a couple of plants, but now you really want to get into it and go full bore, and you've got a good budget that you can put into the tank, then maybe you want to think about an acrylic, custom acrylic or whatever. But there's ups and downs with both of them. Glass, when keeping a planted tank, as with keeping a fish tank, when you get algae on the glass, and when you go to clean the glass, there is always the possibility of picking up a piece of gravel when you're scrubbing the front glass with either your magnetic or your handheld or wand type scrubber. And before you know it, you got a nice big scratch in the glass. It is even more so prevalent when you're talking about acrylic tanks, because it is a softer material and will scratch much easier than glass will. The difference being is that with an acrylic tank, if you want to take the time, you can drain the water out and get some sandpaper and some polishes and stuff and polish the scratch out. Whereas in a glass tank, once it's scratched, you're pretty well stuck with that scratch. There's not much you can do to get rid of the scratch. So that's a footnote to the two different materials. Lid versus non-lid. Most of the planted tank people that I know go topless. They do not use a glass lid or acrylic lid or any lid, because they tend to get water splashed on them and minerals, and they tend to cut down on the actual lighting getting down into the tank. That's just not a good thing for your tank. So most people go without. Should you decide to go with glass versus acrylic, once again, you're gonna run into the same situation. I think glass, if you clean it regularly, is going to hold up and stand up better than the acrylic will, especially with the high light blasting through it and the heat of the lamps. I think the glass would probably hold up better. There is an option to that. You can get some quarter-inch to eighth-inch to half-inch screening, and they do have the clear screening available where you just make up your own frame using regular window screening frames that you can buy at any home improvement store. Uh, and you make up your own frames to fit the tops of your aquarium. They do a pretty good job if you intend on keeping fish that are top swimming fish or that are known jumpers. That might be a good idea as an alternative to glass or acrylic. You can use these nylon screening, which can be purchased from multiple different online sources. Filtration. Let's jump on over into filtration. Filtration. Your choices are canister versus hang-on back versus a sump. Okay, I'm going to hit a little bit on each one of these. Canister filters usually are the predominantly used filter with a planted tank. They are relatively easy in maintenance. They usually give you more than enough filtering capacity to handle the tank. Hang-on backs filters. A lot of aquariums have them, usually on fish-only tanks. It hangs over the back, spills the water back in. It's got a little tube that goes down in that sucks the water out. You got little cartridges you replace. I'm sure that most of us are familiar with these. Don't really recommend them for a planted tank. Main reason being is that with the water coming out of them and breaking the surface of the water, you have a lot of gas exchange, which means that you do get oxygen into the water for the fish, which is a good thing. Fish usually enjoy having oxygen to breathe. But that can be achieved by low water movement. There's plenty of oxygen in the water for the fish, even with just slight water movement at the top. The bad side of breaking the surface and having a lot of agitation in the surface, you lose or off-gas the CO2. And CO2 is very important to plants. That's what they breathe in when the lights are on. They ingest the CO2, break it down, and use the carbon part of the CO2 to actually build
leaf and stem structure for the plant.
That's very important to the plants. So that is the real downside to a hang on the back filter. And you can use them. There's quite a few tanks out there that you will find on YouTube that actually have hang on back filters that also have lush growth in their plants and stuff. I'm not saying that you can't use them, but if you're buying this stuff from new and you want to go with your best options, I would definitely recommend the canister first. And last but not least, and the most expensive, is the sump, or wet dry as it's called sometimes, and everything like that.
I don't think they work as well for a planted tank.
It can be used, but you would more than likely have to, as a matter of fact, I would almost guarantee you have to supplement with CO2, whether it be the chemical or the pressurized CO2, to make up for what you're doing. And it's going to cost you a lot of money because of the fact that once the water drops down into the filter again, all the pressurized CO2, the gas CO2 that you're adding to the tank, is being blown off through the trickle filter and the wet dry part of the filter. So just not a good idea, not the proper filter for a planted tank. Media wise in your filters, I go with the school of thought of using mechanical filtration and biological filtration, and that's it. I don't believe in using carbon or any of the other absorbents that they have out there on the market. Never ever had a problem without running carbon or anything like that. Carbon basically is used for tanks that have odors to them, that have a lot of particulate matter in them. It really is not a necessary thing to a tank. It's great if you have to medicate your tank heavily for a disease, and then after you finish the cycle of medication, to get rid of that medication, you put carbon in, and it will suck the medication out like a sponge. So it's great for that aspect, but other than that, I would never ever use carbon in a planted tank. Nor would I use any of the ammonia sorbs and Purigen or any of that other stuff. I think it's a waste of money. Most of those things are to absorb chemicals in the water that are unwanted, and the best way to balance out and get the water pretty much right is to do a water change. Don't go out and spend a bunch of money on these chemicals and absorbents when you can stick a hose in there, pull out 20% of the water, and add in some fresh water, and you're done. And you've done everything that those things could do, and it didn't cost you a penny. So that's my take on that. With that, I'm going to finish up the first episode, or part 1 of the tanks. Next episode, or part 2, however you'd like to refer to it, will be on the substrate
and fertilizers. So, in summary, what I would recommend as far as lighting goes, unless you got deep pockets and a lot of money to spend, I would stick with the fluorescent being the cheapest, and stepping up to LED if you got a little bit extra money. LED will save you in the long run, since the lights hold their ability to shine bright for a lot longer than the fluorescents do. Now when it comes to the filtration, you can use the hang-on back filters or a sump, but I do lean strongly towards the canister filter, being that it doesn't cause as much agitation at the surface, so that you wouldn't be losing your CO2 as quickly.
We will talk to you soon. Any questions, comments, or whatever, please leave them below. I do believe in answering all questions asked. I don't consider any question a dumb question, so ask away, and I'll do my utmost best to answer it, or refer you to somebody who may be able to give you a better answer. Anyways,
this will conclude part 1 of the Planted Tank series. Make sure to check out parts 2, 3, and 4 of the series. I hope they are useful to you, and I hope you can get some good tips from these videos. And with that, I'll say thank you, and see you soon.